Vikings were known for their fearless voyages and conquests across the seas. But who were these people, and what drove them to become one of the most feared groups of warriors in history? The Vikings lived in Scandinavia during the late 8th to late 11th centuries and were a seafaring people that traded and raided throughout Europe. They were skilled shipbuilders and navigators and used their ships to explore new lands and to carry out raids and trade. The Vikings were fierce warriors, and their reputation as ruthless raiders precedes them. They were known to launch surprise attacks on coastal towns and monasteries, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction in their wake. But the Vikings were not just raiders, they were also traders and settlers, and their influence can be seen in the cultures and languages of the countries they visited. The Vikings were a society of farmers and craftsmen, who lived in small communities ruled by a local chieftain. They were a proud and independent people, with a strong sense of community and family. They believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses and held festivals and rituals to honor their gods. The Vikings left behind a rich cultural heritage, and their artifacts, including jewelry, weapons, and shipbuilding tools, offer a glimpse into their way of life. The Vikings were also known for their sagas, epic tales of adventure and heroism that have been passed down through generations. The Vikings were a fascinating and complex society, and their legacy lives on through the stories, artifacts, and cultures they left behind. The Vikings believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses, each with their own distinct personality and responsibilities. The most prominent gods were Odin, Thor, and Freya. Odin was the god of wisdom, war, and death. He was considered the king of the gods and was depicted as a one-eyed, bearded figure who carried a spear and a pair of ravens. Thor was the god of thunder and war, and was known for his strength and bravery. He was often depicted carrying a hammer and was considered a protector of Asgard, the home of the gods. Freya was the goddess of love, fertility, and war, and was considered one of the most powerful and beloved gods. She was depicted as a beautiful woman who rode in a chariot pulled by cats. The Vikings believed that these gods had the power to influence their lives, and they held rituals and festivals to honor and appease them. They also believed in an afterlife, where those who died bravely in battle could enter Valhalla, the hall of the slain, and continue to fight and feast for eternity. Overall, the Vikings' religious beliefs were deeply intertwined with their culture and way of life, and their gods and goddesses played a significant role in shaping their worldview and actions. The Vikings were known for their raids and conquests, and England was a frequent target of their attacks. The first recorded Viking raid in England took place in 793, when a group of warriors attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne, located on an island off the coast of Northumbria. This event marked the beginning of a period of frequent Viking raids on England's coastal towns and monasteries. The Vikings saw England as a wealthy country with valuable resources, and their raids were primarily motivated by the desire to acquire wealth and power. They would sail their longships up rivers and attack small, isolated communities, taking captives and looting their riches. The raids were often brutal, and the Vikings left a trail of destruction in their wake. Despite their reputation as ruthless warriors, the Vikings also played a significant role in shaping England's history. Over time, they began to settle in England, intermarrying with the local population and establishing their own kingdoms. Some of these settlements grew into major cities, such as Jorvik, which is now modern-day York. In the late 9th and early 10th centuries, the English king Alfred the Great successfully defended against the Vikings and eventually made peace with them, and the Vikings turned their attention to other parts of Europe. Nevertheless, their raids and settlements had a lasting impact on England, and their legacy can be seen in the place names, language, and cultural traditions of the country. The Vikings believed in an afterlife called Valhalla, which was a hall of the slain in Asgard, the home of the gods. According to their beliefs, those who died bravely in battle would be taken to Valhalla by the Valkyries, female warriors who served Odin, the king of the gods. In Valhalla, The fallen warriors would continue to fight and feast for eternity, awaiting the final battle of Ragnarok, when the gods and their enemies would engage in a great conflict that would determine the fate of the world. It's important to note that the Vikings' beliefs about Valhalla and the afterlife were part of their religious and cultural beliefs and should not be interpreted as promoting or glorifying genocide or violence. The Vikings were a complex society that valued bravery, strength, and honor, and their beliefs about the afterlife were a reflection of these values. In terms of actual historical events, the Vikings were known for their raids and conquests, and they often engaged in battles with other cultures and peoples. However, the Vikings were not a single homogeneous group, and their actions and motivations varied greatly. There is evidence of both peaceful trade and violent conflict throughout their history, and it's important to consider the historical context when evaluating their actions. The Vikings, also known as the Norse people, were a seafaring people from Scandinavia who dominated parts of northern Europe from the late 8th to the early 11th centuries. During this time, they engaged in trade, exploration, and conquest, establishing settlements as far away as North America and Africa. However, by the 11th century, the Viking Age was coming to an end. The reasons for this decline were complex and varied, but some of the key factors include political changes. The Vikings were a loosely organized people, and their various kingdoms and settlements were often in conflict with each other. By the 11th century, powerful monarchs and centralized governments had emerged in Europe, making it more difficult for the Vikings to operate as they had in the past. Military defeat. The Vikings faced opposition from the kingdoms they raided, and some of these kingdoms, such as England and France, were able to successfully defend against their attacks. Economic changes. The Vikings were largely dependent on trade and commerce, and as the European economy shifted, the Vikings found it increasingly difficult to maintain their way of life. Conversion to Christianity. As the Vikings came into contact with Christian countries, many of them converted to the new religion, which had a profound impact on their culture and beliefs. Despite these changes, the legacy of the Vikings lives on in the cultures and traditions of the countries they once dominated, and their impact on history continues to be studied and celebrated. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more videos.